Hi and welcome back to Bike Speeds. This week we're going to completely rebuild this Giant TCR. This is quite an epic video, this one. This bike had been crashed and had an awful lot wrong with it that we're going to sort out. We're going to shorten the steerer tube on this one during the video and change the headset bearings. We're going to change the bar tape. It's got broken cables, you can see there. We're going to sort the cables out. It needs a new chain. We're going to service the pedal. One of the pedals had a problem that we're going to deal with. We're going to true the wheels. You can hear there quite audibly the sound of the headset bearings, so we're going to deal with those as well. You can hear here also the brake was free, but as soon as you put the lock on it's rubbing, so the brake was misadjusted with that quick release open and not in its closed position, so that's another problem we're going to sort out. We're going to sort out the rear derailleur hanger that was bent. We're going to sort out a problem with the valve on the wheel, and also it had a bent skewer just to get us going. You can see here how the cables had also perished and deteriorated. You can see how the outers there were breaking away and the inner part of the metalwork there was beginning to rust, so that will gradually pinch onto the cables and cause those not to work. This is our first visible crash damage here. We've got a tear in the wall of the tyre. Unfortunately for this customer, he'd only just put these tyres on, which was a little bit unfortunate for him, but there was actually a bulge on that tyre. You can see it in the line by the treads, so I felt it was prudent and safe to actually change that tyre during this service. This was such a big service, it didn't make sense to skimp and scrape on the cost of a tyre, so we also sorted that one out. So we're going to initially strip down the bike. One of the first problems we found in terms of a problem to solve was this skewer here. You can see is bent. You can see that thread oscillating. This has took quite a knock. The end of the skewer was also damaged, so we're going to address that when we put the bike parts onto the bench. We'll deal with that at the same time. But you can see there it was bent, but fortunately it did come out of the axle of the wheel okay, so I was quite thankful for that really. You can see here the cassette, a little bit oily, a little bit grimy. That can be cleaned up. There wasn't too much wear in that. The chain that was on this bike was actually too short on this bike, but none the more for that, it was a new chain and fitted that cassette well, so we'll clean that cassette up, put that through the ultrasonic cleaner. We're going to remove all the cables on this bike as well, so we may as well take that out. And it showed my first problem there. I noticed that tail ran long as I pulled it out. It was clearly broken, so we know that the reason the gears weren't changing was because it had a broken cable. You can see there the rear derailleur, not too bad, but a little bit grimy, so we'll make sure we clean that up. We are going to polish and ceramic coat this one, a little bit of an upgrade for our customer, so we're going to remove the bottle cages so that we can do that, but it also gives us a time to lubricate the threads of the bolts that hold those on to make sure they don't corrode. Next up, we're going to take the front derailleur off. This presented us with a couple of little problems along the way as well, which we will solve, so that comes off. The back of that, it's not too bad, that one. Just a little clean up and lubrication will make all the difference to that, but we did have an issue with that, which we'll show you as the video goes on. Next up, off come the pedals. We're going to be servicing those pedals, so we take those off of the chain set. Next, I'll remove the chain set itself, so out come the bolts, and again, as I took this pedal arm off, I noticed a problem with it, which we'll deal with during this service. It's the simple little things like what I'll show you with that make the world of difference to these bikes when they're completed. So out comes the chain set. But just note towards me where the pedal goes in the thread, you can see there's a silver line there. That is where at some point in this pedal arm's life it's been clipped by a cable, so that would have been tapping away and has scratched the inner of that. May not have been on this bike, that was a power pedal, so it may have been moved from bike to bike, but somewhere along its journey it's been set up incorrectly, the front derailleur, and it's put that score mark into that chain set, which is a little bit of a shame really. So next up, we'll take the brakes off. So off comes the front one there. We're going to obviously address that quick release that was open, so we'll give that a clean up as well. And again, there's parts on that to be lubricated, so we'll deal with that as we go along. And you can see there's quite a bit of grime and dirt on the back of that. I'm going to put a cable guide on this rear cable as I pull that through. I'm not at this stage sure where that has broken, but we will get it through as far as we can with guides to make sure that we don't have an issue. And we'll just pull that out up the top. Now this actually shows one of the things I hate about coated cables. This had Shimano coated cables, and you can see there the coating is all ruckled and peeling off of that cable. That actually gave us a major headache when we came to put the new cable in there. But that's why I don't like coated cables, because they ruckle up and they actually cause poor shifting and can actually cause problems when you're servicing or replacing them. So now we're going to remove the bar tape. I'm doing all 4 cables on this bike, so it made sense to deal with that and take that off completely. And you also saw in the befores there was a little bit of damage from the crash on the end of one of those, so we're replacing the bar tape as well. So we get all the old tape off and we clean all the residue off, and then we'll remove the cables away from the handlebars. We're going to do the outers as well on these, and out come the brakes, out come the gears. We're going to be using our super slick cables on these. These are a lovely tightly wound stainless steel cable. I much prefer those to these coated cables, so that's what we're going to use on this bike when we put it back together. So out come those cables now. And then the broken cable was actually in the shifter. This is very common on Shimano. You'll start to get poor shifting, and as soon as you get that, get it into your shop to get the cable replaced, or you end up with this problem here, where you end up with a cable that you have to extract out of the shifter itself. You can see there how that's frayed off. The early signs of that are poor shifting. You would start to struggle with your shifting, maybe not dropping down. You may be able to go up the gears okay, but it'll grab on the way down. Gradually you get more and more strands break off until you end up with a cable that breaks and makes the bike unrideable, which was at the point this bike had come in really. It had a, like I said, it had a crash or two, a few knocks along the way, and once it stopped shifting, it was brought into us and we sorted out all the historical problems that this bike had when it came in. Next up, we put a few things into our ultrasonic cleaner. We don't put everything in on every bike, but there's certain parts that are just work so well in an ultrasonic cleaner. Things like the derailleurs, you can really get in to parts that you cannot clean by hand. So these have all gone through. Then we wash off that degreaser with nice warm soapy water, and then I'll dry those off, airline them down, get them all nice and dry, ready for lubricating. You notice there I'm using one of our nylon detailing brushes. We do those in a pack of 5 on our website. The website is a great way of you supporting our YouTube channel. We do all the things that we use on the videos for cleaning and for detailing, and the cables and cleaners and polishes. All of those are available on our website, and it's your way also of supporting the channel. It's the only way we can actually finance these videos, so it's very much appreciated to anyone who's ever put an order in on our website. It is very much appreciated. I can't begin to tell you how important that is for us to be able to continue doing our YouTube videos. So I'm washing off this chain set and getting that all nice and clean. That hasn't been through the ultrasonic cleaner. It wasn't too bad, so we just washed that off. Next up, I'm using our thread locker. Again, it's things like those that are available on our website. That will just stop these pivots coming undone in the derailleur body once it's put together. Jockey wheels vary. Some need greasing, some have sealed bearings. These had the sealed bearings, so we didn't put those through the ultrasonic cleaner. We've rebuilt that without dealing with those. And you can see here we've got a bit of crash damage on the body of this derailleur. We're going to use one of our detailing stickers here, so you can see we do these in an A4 sheet, various colours. I've added a few colours recently, but we're going to use one of these to cover up that scratching in a nice and simple manner. So we've cut a template there to stick over. It'll just take your eye off that damage, just present the bike that little bit nicer, and it's an easy way of detailing little scratches like that along the way with your bike, just to make them a little bit nicer to the eye, a little bit more pleasing when you look at the bike. Now we're lubricating the pivot points on that derailleur with our general purpose oil, and I'm going to use a little bit of our copper grease on the thread of the thumb adjuster, and a little bit of our general purpose grease on the actual adjuster where the plastic meets it. The adjusters often seize in these components, and the importance of lubricating those is way underestimated. Now on this front derailleur, this is the tensioner on the derailleur cable itself, and it was very stiff, and you can see there it started to corrode. So we're going to clean that corrosion off, and then I'm going to lubricate that before I put it back into the derailleur. That's one of those little threads that again will often seize, and it can make it almost impossible to get a nice shift on your front derailleur if that hasn't been serviced during a service, if it hasn't been lubricated. It will just give the longevity to that part. It might not be this cable, it might be in tens of thousands of miles time where you'll be so grateful that you've had your bike serviced and had things like that lubricated. Again, we've got a thumb adjuster here. This is an alloy one on this particular one, so I'm just going to use a little bit of our general purpose grease in there. There's a thumb adjuster on there that will run up and down those threads, so if it's lubricated, that should stop any problems with that as we adjust it on the bike. Next up, I'm going to deal with this skewer that was bent. I've put a bolt at the top and bottom of the threads to support it and to also stop the vice damaging that thread. and then I've lined that up by eye and straightened that off, and that's all it took just to enable that to come in and out of the wheel a little bit easier, be a little bit squarer, seat the wheel correctly in the frame so that we can get our adjustments for gearing correct as well. Little things like that, tiniest of movement, not quite setting a bike up right, it just makes all the difference, and it's subtle and easy to do. Now I'm going to just torque the chain set bolts themselves. I always do this on the bench, it's a little bit easier than on the bike, and it also sets it in its final position. And now I turn my attention to this left hand pedal arm. You can see there it had an old sticker on it that's been gradually wearing off, so we're going to peel that one off and just clean the residue off of the pedal arm itself. It's just a subtle detail. Again, it's about the presentation of the bike to make it that little bit nicer than when it came in. And this bike also had this washer missing from the back of the pedal arm. It's quite an important one, this. It's a little rubber washer. It just seats on the bearing for your pre-tension. You can see there the wear on this pedal arm where the pedal arm has just been kissing on the bearing outer itself, so that rubber will just stop that problem happening. So I was quite glad that we were able to sort that one out for him as well. Next up, we turn my attention to the pedals. This was part of the service he'd asked us to service the pedals. On this particular pedal, the left hand one, you can see there how the O-ring that seals it from the elements had broken, so we've got a new O-ring there to put in. That was all corroded, and actually the grease inside this pedal, one side was a nice colour, this side the grease had gone brown. You could see where there was ingressing inside that pedal because of that O-ring breaking down. So we'll clean all that old grease off, and then we'll add some nice fresh premium grease onto there. This has roller bearings in the end of these pedals. They're very, very nice pedal, but they do need greasing and re-lubricating. And a new O-ring onto the pedal body itself. And then we're going to use the correct Loctite glue that is recommended by the pedal manufacturers, the 401 Loctite. A small amount on the threads, they recommend 1 to 2 mil on there, so it's a very small amount just to stop that thread coming undone without absolutely binding it on. So that pedal is now absolutely perfect. Next up, we're going to shorten the steerer tube on this one. So we'll start off by taking the handlebars off and removing the forks themselves. We're also going to be doing the headset bearings on this one, so all of that is done at the same time. To cut the forks, I have to first remove this compression fitting. It's then as simple as putting in the Park Tool guide and sawing it with the correct blade. Obviously this rider's now happy with his position on the bike. You never want to be doing this too soon in the life journey of a bike, because obviously once it's shortened you can't lengthen it, so you want to make sure that you're happy with your riding position and where your spacers are on your bike before you ever consider doing this. You may have seen that he had a similar amount of spacers top and bottom. He's obviously become happy with his riding position on this bike, and it's time to shorten that and tidy it up. Next up, we're going to remove the headset bearings, both top and bottom. This bottom one was particularly corroded, you'll see that as it comes out. The right hand one there is the bottom one. There was a lot of rust around that, so the bearings inside there are clearly breaking down and rusting away. That was what was creating all the noise on the steering, so we'll also do those. And again, with such a big service like this, it's lovely when you get a bike back like this to ride and everything is nice and smooth and working as it should. Now I'm putting in the new bearings. As always, I grease around the bearing and the cup with the Bikespeed's premium grease. There was nothing wrong with the cups or how they seated, it was just natural wear on the bearings. Same process for the cup on the bike. So that's the new bearings installed. Time to get the forks back together. Obviously I only needed half the spacers this time, and there were no problems putting it back together. On go the bars and the tensioner. So that's all the jobs for the steerer sorted, and it looks great with that short stack height. Now I'm going to begin the detailing of this bike with a washing down. I started with the snow foam pre-spray. This pulls the loose dirt and debris down off the bike. Then we agitate whatever is left over with our big softy brush. You see these in every video. We use this at least 5 times a day. It really does make cleaning bikes a 2-minute job. As always, it's available on our website, and as you can see, this is a product we really do stand behind. This bike didn't have loads of loose dirt, but had watermarks all over it that needed agitating, then removing. Half of the cleaning is done when drying the bike off. We use microfiber towels, which really remove all the residue and watermarks from the bike. Next up, I'm going to use our Autoglim Super Resin polish. This polish is a lovely polish on bikes, it really is. It's so creamy and smooth. I work it in small areas. I'll notice little parts on the bike that maybe need a little firmer touch to them, where I can get marks off with this as well. And I just work it on each part of the frame. So I'll do the forks, top tube, down tube, seat post, chainstays and so on. I work my way through the bike, working that in, getting it nice and creamy. I do the whole bike at once and buff that off after it's done. So next up, the new microfiber towel and a buff off. You can see the shine, especially on that headstock there, how that shine is really beginning to come out on that bike. So it's lovely polish, nice and shiny, but the final detail on this one is the rapid ceramic spray. This allows the water and debris on the bike to pool up into tiny beads and not really stick to the frame. It really protects the frame to the next level. So if ever you want a bike where you can just see the water pouring off the bike, you need to ceramic coat it, and this is next level on the detailing for us. So again, you can see there a new microfiber towel, working in small areas at a time, building that shine, and the bike is absolutely lovely now. Next up, I'm going to turn my attention to the wheel. Now, you often hear me say in these videos how when I wash them down, it's a nice way of being tactile with the wheel and the bike. Well, this wheel really shows that to a T. One of the things I noticed with this was that the spokes, nearly all of them, were twisted. They coiled up themselves, where someone had obviously adjusted the wheel for tension, but rather than holding these spokes, which are bladed, they were turning and actually twisting. So this wheel was probably one of the worst tension wheels I've ever dealt with, and I'm surprised it hadn't failed. I really am surprised. You can see here on the graphs on the left how we've got number 4 there at 1 on the left, and very low in tension, others very high in tension. We twisted all those twists out with our fit into hole bladed spokes, turned them. You can see there that visual representation of before, how some are way over tight and some are way too loose. I'm staggered this wheel never failed, and that's how we got it in the end with that visual representation there. We got everything twisted out, everything straightened, tension's all correct, and I was quite pleased with the way that came up. And again, something else I noticed when we were washing it down, although I had discussed this with the customer so it wasn't solely noticed, was that this tyre was damaged on the tyre wall. So we are replacing that with a brand new tyre. So on goes the tyre there. And actually I had a little bit of problem with this inner tube. It's like a plastic bag. These aren't like your old fashioned inner tubes. It was a real problem to get that back in. It was a right old fiddle, that one. I was worried I was going to nip that and damage it, but thankfully we didn't. So we reinflate that tyre, and now I know it's nice and true, nice clean cassette, a skewer that is actually straight, spokes that are now straight and tensioned correctly. And we also had this wobbly valve in here. Again, this was one of the requests of the customer, was to deal with that. We've adapted a rubber grommet there to just support and hold that and stop that rattling in the wheel itself. Next up, we are going to start the cabling, and along the way with this one we hit a snag, which will show you. Yeah, these turned into a bit of an epic job really. Simon's a great editor at these videos, and he can make many hours of work look like a minute or two's work, and trust me, these took us quite a bit of time to get absolutely spot on and right. Now I'm taping them secure. I get them underneath the bars so that they can't be felt once the bar tape is on. It doesn't need lots of tape, but as long as it's tight, it will hold the cables in place. But we're initially getting those in at the handlebar end. Once they are all in, we can now start to thread them through the frame. So we're going to start off with the rear brake here, and it's fitting. The little screw that holds that into the frame has to be put in before the outer goes into there, so that's popped in. We're now quite happy with the way that's in. And then we're going to deal with the rear derailleur and front derailleur. You can see here the front derailleur would not go in the hole. The inner piping that runs through the bike with that coated cable that we pulled out had clogged. There was no way of getting that cable in, so the only way was to replace this inner cable guide. Very fiddly one to do this one on this bike, but we did achieve it. You can see it coming out there. So this is the old outer coming out of the frame. We used a cable there to guide that through to enable us to get the new one into the frame. So that now goes into the frame, so we've replaced that, and that way we will have a nice smooth shift, and we haven't forced that cable into the bike with all that outer coating inside there. So we can now pop that into the bike. that runs in nicely and thankfully popped out the other end nice and easily. And then also the rear derailleur. These actually cross over the handlebars on this bike, so they go in opposite sides, so that's why they seem to be slightly the wrong way around if you were noticing that. But we will now get this one into the rear derailleur and the little fitting in the bottom of the bike, and then a new outer and a guide on the end there. And now we can start to reconstruct and rebuild the bike. So first thing in is the chain set. So we'll just give a little bit of lubricant on there to seat onto the bearings. Left hand pedal arm on there with that new washer, pre-tensioned, tightened up, bolts go in there. So we'll torque that up at this stage. I like to torque up bottom bracket areas because the shift is left to right, not forwards and back, so it's nice to get those in their final set position before we start the adjustments of the front derailleur. On go the pedals. I'm using a little bit of our copper grease there in the threads to stop those bonding, to enable us to take them off if we need to in the future. On goes that front derailleur, just check its position. On goes that new cable, so we just pop that in, tighten that up, and we're able to use the little threaded bolt that we've now lubricated to get the tension onto that cable right there. So that will get it in its correct position for when we start our adjustments and making sure that the chain is shifting up and down the front rings there. Nip that off. I always make that nice and short into the front derailleur on that one to make sure there's no tail on that to clip the pedal as it happened previously on this chain set. In go the bottle cages. I've lubricated the holes that they're going into. Very, very common for fittings to seize on frames. A little bit over tightened, that stretches the thread and then they can get corrosion in there and seize. So we've made sure that won't happen by lubricating those threads. Now the derailleur hanger itself was bent on this one and it was quite significant actually, so we just straighten that up, make sure that's now absolutely correct, and it is. So once that is correct, that will also give us an improved shift when we come to adjusting the gears on this one. So that comes out. That was probably as a result of the crash, and that damage that was on that rear derailleur was probably all through that hanger getting bent, or how that hanger got bent rather. So we've straightened that up as well. On goes that new rear derailleur cable. So like I say, we're putting new cables right through this bike, which is always makes it easier when we're servicing a bike to adjust if everything's fresh there. Again, a little bit of copper grease on the bolts that hold the brakes. Very, very common for those to seize in the holes. They're quite tight in the holes, and it's very common, especially on the front one, for those to seize. So if we lubricate that, I know next time I can take this part a little bit easier. New cable on the back there, tighten that up. Use a cable guide there to shorten that to make it the right length, and that way the front and rear will be the same length, and it's just a little detail that I always use that cable guide. It's my way of attention to detail to make sure that everything ends up correct. So you can see there the cable guide I'm using, new end on there, brakes and L set up, and that front quick release is closed so that everything there is now actuating correctly. And on goes our new chain. This chain is actually a couple of links longer than the original one. The customer was aware that the original one was a little bit short, so we've actually made this, sized it and made it the correct size for the bike. And now I can just do a little bit of thumb adjuster work on the rear gears to make sure that they're shifting up and down. That's all great. Then we can do the front, and then we'll check the brakes. I do hope you're enjoying this video. Please do like this video. Also, drop us a comment about bike you've crashed and how you dealt with that. All the comments and the likes really help a video like this perform and get it out there, and that's what we're always trying to do. So please do help us and like the video and drop us a comment as well in this one. Now I'm going to be putting the bar tape on, and when I get to this end, I always like the final tip of the bar tape to be underneath the bars. So I cut that, so as you can see there, the tip just sits underneath the bars. Same with my tape that I'm using on the end. I start it off under the bars, I wrap it round, and I cut that there so that it sits under the bars, so that you don't see any of those joins or ends from the observing point of riding the bike. It's all nice and smooth. I always think your handlebars and your hoods are the area that you're looking at the most when you're riding, so I always like to line up logos on stems and sort the handlebars out so as everything's lined up correctly, because that's the area you're looking at the most. So now I'm working my way through the bike with the torque wrench, making sure that everything is torqued correctly to the correct specifications, pinch bolts, mounts, brake pads. I see things over tightened and over torqued all the time. Using the torque wrench means I don't have to wind anything in over tight. I can check it as I go that everything is tight enough. That makes the bike far more serviceable in the future and won't make removing a component an hour-long affair. As always, the saddle and the seat post was slightly loose. The saddle has a lot to handle and needs regular checking as it works loose over time, even once it's been torqued. Last of my checks is the rear derailleur. I'm happy now that everything is set up correctly. And you can see here what a dramatic change we've made to this bike. It's gone from unsafe, unrideable, previously crashed with problems, to well sorted, everything adjusted correctly, all the little problems that we found solved, and it's now absolutely ready to race and ride. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please do drop a like and a comment, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye for now.